while we are finished. Dangerous to learn little bits of a new language. And this morning was it the breakfast table? We were learning some new words, and the word that they were teaching me was lacquer. Lacquer. And they said, you need to tell your wife you look lacquer. And I said, you know what she's going to think? Because you know lacquer in the English language means varnish. And it says that's going to mean that she looks shiny or polished. And so we thought, well, that's probably not the best way to compliment your wife. We started by looking at God's space and entering this new space where 60% of the population is not interested in walking into churches. And then we looked at what living in God's space looks like. We took a look at simple church and how that works. Now we're going to spend just a few moments, and this is going to be kind of a much lighter presentation. And it's going to include a 20-minute video at the end here that we'll watch together that I think you'll find just really inspiring. As we get started together, let's have prayer one more time and ask for God to bless and to be here with us. Dear Father, camp meeting down. And it's been a good weekend. But as we share one last time, we ask for your presence, your blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. How would you answer the question, what is discipleship? Anyone want to try it? What is discipleship? Go ahead. Talk to me out loud, but so I can hear you. A follower of Jesus. All right? I like that. Somebody else. How would you describe what discipleship is? Yeah, right here, and then we'll jump to the very back. Help. A teacher, okay? Behind her? Accepting discipline. A discipler, okay, accepting discipline, all right. Somebody else. These are all good. Any other angles? Yeah. A student, all right. Any other thoughts? Discipleship is what? Go ahead. A missionary. These are all good. Mission-oriented. I am going to suggest along these same lines that discipleship is influence. You know, the Gospel Commission says, go and make disciples. And all the different examples that you folks gave, disciples, to make disciples, you've got to have influence in their life. Because if you don't have influence, you don't have the capacity to disciple people, to make disciples. You ever heard the term centers of influence? It's a common term that you'll find in the Spirit of Prophecy writings, Ellen White's writings. And the whole concept of making a center of influence, often we take that and say, okay, I'm going to use some kind of a business or a health retreat or some kind of center of influence. But I want a few moments unpacking what influence is about. I believe in today's culture. And then we'll shift gears and we'll conclude with a video. And that will actually wrap us up for this afternoon. Coming from ministry of healing, there is need of coming close to the people by personal effort. That is a picture of influence. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. This is about coming close to people. It's interacting with people. It's really hard to influence from a distance. It takes up close influence via online sermons. And I'm not saying that doesn't influence people. But in influencing at personal levels, it's eyeball to eyeball. It's hand to hand. It's engaging in their life. And I think this begins to capture it. Here's a few other from ministry of healing. The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and the bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, the inexperienced counseled. We are to weep with those that weep and rejoice with those rejoice. This is an influence that is personal. It's coming alongside with people. It's entering into their world. It's entering into their pain. It's caring. It's comfort. That's influence. You know, we have a saying, and I think you have the same concept. You heard the saying that says, it's often in the derogatory. People say, well, they don't practice what they... You got it. That's because there's a disconnect in influence. It's people saying they're not practicing what they're preaching. The influence connection is lost. There's a discrepancy. But when we walk with people, when we carry their burdens, that's influence. That's discipleship. Go and make disciples. It's much more than a spiritual gifts inventory test. Series of, in the States, you may have heard of, on the West Coast, what's called the baseball diamond. And you go from first base and you go around these different classes in a church setting to disciple people. And often discipleship or influence is approached from a classroom perspective. And what I'm suggesting is that influence is a personal, it's an interactive eyeball to eyeball.
Microphone has changed. Now you can.
Here's another one from Ministry of Healing. Accompanied by the power of persuasion and the power of prayer and the power of the love of God, this work cannot be without fruit. As you pull all this together, this method of influence, personal interaction, is what I have come to call long-haul evangelism. We often look for short evangelism methods. Methods that within a week or two we can communicate what we want and we can get on with the next crowd. The long-haul concept is actually a spin-off from long-haul trucking. In long-haul trucking in the States, we have these big 18-wheelers. You have the same thing here that goes from they take a load from the east up another load and they long haul it back to the East Coast, and it's just staying on track, hauling the load from one location to the other location. It's not short-term, it's long-haul evangelism. And this kind of influence when it comes to people is not so much about preaching the truth as it is about living the truth. And when necessary, using a few words. Have you heard the little phrase, you're a sermon in? Does it ring a bell? You're a sermon in shoes? That must be an English saying. It's a saying that says, it's one thing to get up and talk evangelism. And when you live it and other people notice, it's evangelism, it's influence that is caught more than it's taught. It's what Jesus did. He came alongside people and he just ministered to their needs. I wanted, in this actually last slide, before we look at this video clip, I want to use from Ministry of Healing a very famous quote, but I want to look at it a little bit differently than we often do. Is this one familiar to you? Christ's method alone? Okay, so it is a familiar one. Christ's method alone, people. And then Christ's method alone is actually outlined here. The Savior, what's number one? He mingled with men, and we would say and women, as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy for them, number two. Number three, he ministered to their needs. Number four, he won their confidence. And then number five, then he bade them follow me. Let's take those first four. Are those more preaching or are they more action events? What are they? They're action events. So now we're talking about Christ's method. Mingling, sympathizing, ministering, winning confidence. If you were to take these 5 items and put percentages to them, the first 4 would account for what? 20, 40, 50, 60, 80%. 80% of Christ's ministry, influence, 80% of it was action-oriented. Was involvement with people. And only 5%, 20%, the 5th item, was inviting an invitation to bid them follow me. Now I want you to take this Christ method alone, 80% action, 20% talking, and compare that to how we typically do it in church venues. When we think of influence, discipleship, evangelism, usually we spend most of our time, 80% of our time, on number 5, right? Much of the time, and we use that in evangelistic series, we do a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week. We invite people to bid them to follow Jesus because we have explained truth, new truth. Nothing wrong with that. But is that Christ's method? I'm going to suggest to you that the influence, the discipleship process is much, much more effective when we spend 80% of our time walking beside people, weeping when they weep, laughing when they laugh, serving, helping, coming alongside, and being Christ's hands and feet in a hurting and a dying world. That's long-haul evangelism. But it's not it doesn't get fast results. That's one thing I really value about AFM. Maybe even those working with AFM here do not even realize that 6-7 years ago when we were 8, 9 years ago. There was a gentleman that at that time was working with AFM. I think if I remember his name was Dale Goodson. Does that ring a bell? Okay. Dale Goodson was the one that taught me this principle of long haul evangelism as compared to a fast approach trying to get some fast results. And he said, Milton, he says, I tell people as they are heading into the mission field, don't expect results for the first 6 years. And I thought, whoa, that's very different than a 3-week evangelistic series looking for some results. And I am indebted to Dale for passing on that tidbit of what long-haul evangelism looks like, because it involves years of mingling, years of sympathizing and ministering until you even begin to win confidence. You gain influence. The Scripture's word is go and make disciples. You gain discipleship capacity. And after 6 years, as Dale was sharing this with me, is you begin to see the ability to bid people follow Jesus. So simple church is not fast results. That's the bottom line. And I tell people in simple church planting, if you're looking and thinking that this is a fast results approach, you need to retool. Because simple church is about coming alongside people and journeying with them, walking with them, mingling and sympathizing and ministering and winning their confidence. And that takes time. Lots and lots of time. And when you invest that kind of energy in people's lives, you gain the right to be able to speak into their lives. In our simple church at home, we've been gathering for about 5 years, and there is a family that I have come to love dearly, a family we met in the community. We've been meeting together for 3 years, and our relationship with this one family has grown to the place where they have told us and we have told them, you have the right to speak into my life. If you see something in my life where I am causing pain to my family, where I'm causing pain to somebody, where you sense I'm going the wrong direction, our relationship is to the place where we have given each other permission to speak into our life. That's influence that comes out of a relationship. And that's long haul evangelism. So this principle in influence is mingling. Relationships require time. In other words, there's no shortcut. And the beauty about simple church is there's no pressure to succeed. There's no pressure to prove your success. And so it frees people up and to be authentic in their relationship investment, because they're not having to produce a number to report somewhere. Every once in a while, people will call me up discouraged. And they'll say to me, Milton, maybe a husband-wife team that lives way off out in the country, is simple church planting. They'll call me up and they're discouraged. They say, Milton, we've only been able to connect with one person. And on Sabbath, there's just the 3 of us. We're obviously doing horribly because there's just 3 of us. And I will listen. I'll ask questions. I'll reflect. And I'll say, so here's what I hear you telling me. There's 3 of you, obviously low numbers, right? 2 of you are one person you're reaching, you've connected in with, you have influence with. Let me paint the picture just a little bit differently. 3 people, 1 out of 3, that's 33%. So what you're telling me is 33% of your Sabbath gathering are secular unchurched people and you're doing horrible. And they say, we didn't think about it that way. I say, any church building down the road would love to have 33% of the community sitting in their building. I said, God is using you in ways way beyond what you will ever dream of. Press on, be of good courage, because you're making a kingdom difference in a person's life. And right now, that's 3%. And they'll say, oh, well, looking at it that way is a total different way. Thank you. We'll check in later on. Bye-bye. And they head off, and they're back on track. Their courage is good. That's influence, though. It's slow, it's long haul, and it takes time. Sympathizing, ministering to their needs, winning their confidence, this is influence. If this is pocket change for those of you who are parents, you know, there comes a time where we have to make some hard calls with our kids. And when we make those hard calls, we take out money and we spend our pocket change. It costs us. It costs the relationship. But we hopefully are enjoying with fun and enjoyment and friendship with our kids. During those times, we're adding pocket change back into our pockets. But sometimes we have to spend it. There, with influence, it's about building, it's about adding pocket change. And there comes a time when someone says, they come up to you, like I explained, and they say, do you see anything in my life that needs to be addressed? When that happens, you know that you have influence. Now, when that happens, it's not a case of, well, there are a few things I've been waiting to talk to you about. That moves you into this. Simple Church is about a journey. It's walking with people. It's not about this, I know more than you, I'm more about journeying together. And when people come to you and come to the place and say, is there anything in my life that you see? To maintain that kind of authentic relationship requires us to say, I value that. What do you now see in my life? You've got to stay reciprocal in that kind of relationship. What is it? What is discipleship? Go and make disciples. I would translate it, go and gain influence. And Christ's method alone gives us the keys on how to do that. Mingling, sympathizing, ministry. Let me tell you about Jesus. And I invite you to follow the same God that I have followed. That's influence. Make sense? There's no shortcuts to it. It's messy, it's time-consuming, and it's expensive. But at the end of the day, it wins the vote. Because when you have we recently spent $500 to get a family a new set of tires. I've told you the other day, Simple Church spent $7,000 to get a new for a family whose house burned down. I've told you about other Simple Churches who bought dentures, $5,000, $5,000. At the end of the day, that wins the vote because you've invested and now you have influence. We're going to shift gears and we're going to wrap up with a video. It's about a 15, 20-minute video. It's actually a story. And I hope that this story will leave you with some inspiration to press on in what God has called you and I to do. We need to make sure the sound works, but we're going to give it a go. Are we ready? But we don't have audio. Not a problem. We'll get it figured out.
Whenever Jesus wanted to get to the heart of an issue, he told a parable, a story that people would never forget. When I was a kid, something happened to me that I'll never forget. It changed my life forever.
Folks just joining us, top of the morning. Hope you slept well last night. A very refreshing rain shower. We'll have a high of 83 under sunny skies today. And if the weather keeps on like this, we'll see bumper crops. Opening grain prices at the Chicago Board of Trade. Spring wheat $4.23 a bushel, oats at $1.75, barley and corn unchanged, holding steady. I'll be back in a minute with today's.
Growing up on a farm was a great experience. My dad, mom, and brothers, we did everything together. We'd work hard in our fields all day. Then Mom would fix us one of her big dinners.
Lord, we thank you for these blessings and for this food that you have provided. Amen.
Let's dig in. Jerry, pass the mashed potatoes.
Hey, we were able to go out and look at the wheat fields today.
Dinner was non-stop about being a cowboy. And Charlie over there, he was always making us laugh. Dinner was certainly my brother Bobby's favorite time of the day. I'm Jerry, the oldest. I kind of had to watch out for these little guys. Mom and Dad sure had their hands full, and they used every opportunity to teach us something new about the farm and hard work, but mostly about love and respect. I guess you could say we were a pretty close family. Our farm was big, with wheat fields stretching as far as my eyes could see. Dad worked hard planting those fields, and by the end of the summer, the wheat would be ripe and the harvest would be ready to bring in. He'd say to us, "Boys, when the harvest, you have to be ready, or we could lose the whole crop." I knew how important the harvest was, and I never doubted for a minute we'd be ready. But it wasn't harvest time yet. And on the farm, we had a lot of other work to keep us busy, like saddling up and moving our cattle to the south pasture. Riding with Dad and Uncle John was always an adventure. And even when things were a little more than I could handle, Dad still believed in me. And somehow it always worked out. Once the job was done, before heading home, we talked, just as men, about hard work, good friends, and of course, the harvest. I never left that pasture without learning something enough, without bringing home something special for Mom. While we waited for our wheat to ripen, Charlie and I would help Dad haul hay. The two of us would work as hard as we could to see how many bales of hay we could bring in. You see, the more we brought in, the more we could brag to our friends when we went to town on Saturday. I remember that day because it was really hot, hotter than usual, even for July. And though my dad never complained, I could tell he was having one of those headaches.
Sure thing, Dad.
But we finished bringing in the hay and went straight to work on the combine so it would be ready for the harvest. It always amazed me how much work Dad could do.
Boys,
And I worked right along. Like he did so often, Dad took us for a walk through the fields that night. The setting sun made everything warm and golden. Dad used to tell Bobby that God painted it that way just for us. We talked about the day we had together. We talked about the harvest. It wouldn't be long now. Dad said it was going to be a great harvest. It had been a long day, and I slept hard that night. So hard I didn't hear what was happening in our house. The next morning, I woke to voices from so early in the day. Why were they here?
Downstairs.
I wondered what was happening.
All right, come on, let's go.
I heard Mom and Grandma talking in whispered voices. Then Mom called us all together.
Jerry, Charlie, Davy, I need to talk to you. Something has happened to your father.
I looked into her eyes and knew it was bad.
Last night, he became very ill. We tried to help him, but there was nothing we could do. Your daddy died.
My dad was gone. In an instant, our lives were changed forever. His headaches, we thought it was just the heat. Time seemed to stand still. It hurt so much, and it felt like it would never go away.
Lord, you know what a terribly hard time it is for us right now. But we thank you so much for being here for us.
Mom did her best to keep going.
Just give us
Mealtime was the hardest, though.
to do next.
We prayed for strength.
Thank you, Father.
We needed each other now more than ever. We missed him so much. The next few days were busy ones. Uncle John was the first one there to lend a hand. We all pulled together to help things along. Even our friend Amy would come by and help us with our chores. We'd walk through the fields talking and trying to make sense of it all.
I remember your dad saying that
It was Amy who reminded me that when my dad needed help,
maybe
he would pray.
start praying.
And she thought that maybe we should too. We did pray, and we talked about the good times and tried to look ahead. But ahead, all I saw were problems. I was worried about the harvest. It was coming soon, and like Dad said, if we weren't ready, the whole crop. I couldn't let that happen. I didn't want to lose the harvest. I didn't want to let Dad down. Being the oldest, I felt such a responsibility. For the first time in my life, I was really afraid. I prayed that God would send someone to help. I thought that things would get better. but they only seemed to get worse. The weather got hotter and hotter, and the wheat was ripening sooner than anyone expected. My worst fears were coming true. With Dad gone, there was no one to work in the fields. It was hard, but Mom, all of us, we kept praying. It was early morning, and Charlie and I were at the barn feeding our horses. I used to love this time of the day, but now it was just a reminder that we were one day closer to losing our wheat. It was usually pretty quiet around our farm, but this morning there was a sound, faint and off in the distance at first, a kind of roar that was getting stronger and louder. I could hardly believe my eyes. One after another, big, huge combines. It seemed like the whole world was coming to our farm. They started in the big field, the one to the north, their reels sweeping the wheat into the combines. Side by side, they moved from field to field. As I watched them unload the golden wheat, I thought about Dad and my prayers, and I understood. I wasn't alone. All these people, they had work of their own to do, but they left their fields to come and help us. Together, they did what no one. And one day, they brought in the whole harvest. The harvest was finished. The wheat was saved. The fields were clean. Afterward, all the families gathered in the field north of the farm for the biggest harvest meal I had ever seen. I was amazed at how many people had come to help. It was a time to celebrate. Everyone had a part in helping with the harvest. Why, there was Dad's best friend, Mr. Hanson. Mom couldn't believe that Aunt Sally and Mrs. Johnson were getting along so well. And there was Harry Bender and Mr. Sanders. Well, it wasn't that they didn't get along, it's just that they never did much together. Yeah, I knew I was part of something special here, but I guess the harvest is something that can bring people together. John said this whole day reminded him of the story in the Bible when a lot of people were hungry to know God, but there weren't enough workers to tell them. Jesus said, when the harvest is ready, pray and ask God to send people who will help. Well, that's what we did with our harvest, and it's a day I'll never forget. Helping with the harvest changed all of us in one way.
Which we're able to bring in.
It was time to come together. It was harvest time. I still come back to the farm and walk in the fields, just like I did when I was a kid. These fields were my whole world. And the things God taught me that summer when I saw everyone come together to harvest our wheat have stayed with me all my life. Now I see the lesson of the harvest. There is another field. It's God's field, filled with people who are ready to respond to Him. And just as my family prayed for someone to come and help us bring in the harvest, people all around the world are praying that someone would help them bring in the harvest in their land, in their city, on their campus. Everywhere I look, I see people who are lost without the love and message of Jesus Christ. And the urgency that we felt on our farm is the same urgency that exists today. We can all do something. We can pray, give, reach out to a friend, even go to another land. This could be the greatest spiritual harvest time in history, and that's why we are all needed. It's time to come together. It's harvest time.